Hey folks, it's Rod with Pow Group. Welcome back on The Pursuit of Wealth. Today is Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. I hope you're well. And with me today is Pascal St, CEO of 3IQ Digital Asset Management. Welcome to the show, Pascal. I'm excited to have you on. Really looking forward to the discussion today.
Same here. Thank you so much for having us on the show today. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely my pleasure as well. It's all mine. I want to say first off, kudos to you and the team for being one of the first to pioneer a spot ETF here in Canada for XRP. It's an exciting time, for myself. It's near and dear to my heart for sure.
Nice.
And it's no small feat for sure. I really admire the leadership from the 3IQ team, making it available to the traditional investor and available in regular brokerages. Also just an extremely exciting time, right? And it's going to be available in registered plans, so TFSAs or SPs. Really a monumental shift in the industry. So maybe you could just start off with kind of how you developed the XRP ETF. Like I think you worked on with Ripple on it, right? In the early days and with the prospectus. Maybe if you could just touch on that, and if you could just elaborate what it was like working with Ripple.
Yeah, sure. Maybe take a step back just a little bit in the history of the company, which will tell
Sure.
you why we work a lot with the foundations and the community at large to develop these products. So 3IQ, we're a digital asset manager only, so we're exclusive to crypto. Been in the game for 10 years now, and 10 years plus. And our claim to fame really came way back when we were the first to actually get a regulated product or ETP for Bitcoin and Ethereum approved way back in 2020. So those are the closed-end funds that we have. But that was a multi-year journey working with the regulators in Canada. Because I know, as we know, we also had our FTX moment in Canada with Quadriga. There's a Netflix documentary. At that point, the team at 3IQ felt that it was time to bring regulated product to Canadians and retail at large. And so that's the history. And so our team is made up of really two types of individuals. We have individuals who come from what we would call TradFi, who've worked with the regulators, who worked with the big law firms, who've worked in large asset managers, and understand how to get things moving into traditional space. And then the other team, which are basically crypto native and are super passionate about the technology and passionate about developing relationships with the community. And so I share that because since day one, we've been super integrated with the Bitcoin OGs. When we first launched the product, we were very integrated with the ETH community when we launched that product. And so for us, tapping into the community is super important. And so yes, when it was time to start exploring for the XRP ETF, Ripple was a natural partner for us. Again, being native in this space, having deep connections globally. And so for us, we wanted to make sure that the prospectus had, captured the proper ethos of what the Ripple Foundation was trying to do. And so again, there wasn't anything overly complicated in this ETF. I mean, it wasn't the first crypto ETF that we've ever developed. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure we tap into the community, get their feedback, and particularly on the investment objective to make sure that it properly reflects the goals of the community. And again, not to go too deep into the detail, but you saw the difference, and they did have to shift their prospectuses. But the competition, when they submitted their prospectuses, it was called Ripple ETF. It had words like staking, which is not possible in Ripple. So they were taking old legal documents and just trying to quickly create an ETF with Ripple. So again, understanding the language, understanding what is or isn't possible was super important, and also just generally getting feedback. And so because of all this work, because of who we are as a firm, how long we've been here, and our engagement, Ripple also decided to partner with us, not just on the development of the prospectus, but as one of the original investors in the product as well.
Okay, thank you for that. That's awesome. You brought up Quadriga. I was actually one of the victims there, and that was. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was awful. I know a lot of people that were involved as well. Friends and family, and that was one of the safer bets at the time. I remember they had all these kinds of security features. Multiple two-factor authentication, that's one thing that really stood out to me. And as soon as I sent my money over to that exchange, that was kind of on me as well. I was a newbie, and I didn't really know, hey, don't send all of your Bitcoin and your Ethereum and over to one exchange. And then literally like a week later, it went down. So yeah, definitely heart goes out to those that were affected by that. But yeah, it just goes to show you the need for regulated
Absolutely.
products as well, right?
Education as well. I mean,
Mhm.
we're again we're of the ethos of if you feel comfortable self-custodying and buying it on your own and being the master of your destiny, absolutely that comes with a lot of education and time. For us, we see the ETFs. There's multiple benefits, right? Like yes, you get institutional infrastructure, you get the regulated portion, you get the tax advantage side of things. It's hard, it's impossible right now in Canada. That may change in the future, but to hold crypto in a tax advantage account. So there's a lot of advantages with the ETF. But one thing we do find is that it is a gateway towards education. And so once you
Right.
buy it, either on your own through self-directed methods or with an advisor, you tend to want to start learning more what's in your portfolio, and that begins and kickstarts your education in the crypto and digital asset journey, which is super important for us. So either way, we just like to see people come in to the space using the right vehicles, getting educated, and then if they choose to diversify their portfolios between ETFs and spot, we're super thrilled for that, as long as they, of course, utilize the right tools.
Totally. And while we're on the topic of security and Quadriga as well, is kind of a good segue here. In terms of taking customer funds seriously and dealing with the security aspect. So what would you have available? Like obviously you have institutional grade custody, use Coinbase, right? And then there's CDIC. It would all be protected under that as well, correct?
Yeah, so if we look at the layers of what is or is not available, and so there's the building out of the ETF. So the way
Yeah.
Canada works, and not all jurisdictions are the same, the way Canada works is you have a regulated custodian that is approved by the Canadian regulators, and for us that's Tetra Trust, and then you have sub custodians, which think of it as your technology provider, which in this case for this ETF is Coinbase. There are others on the market, like we used to be we used to use Gemini as well, and we've switched to Coinbase for different reasons, and all of them meet the standard of the Canadian regulators, but they all fall under Tetra Trust, and then we manage the funds, and so the funds are a separate entity. So the ETFs are their own legal entity, so they're not owned by 3IQ. They're not owned by any investment manager. So all our competition's ETFs do not own the ETF. They're their own corporate trust. And then the manager, 3IQ in this case, gets assigned to manage the operations of that, and of course gets paid a management fee to do so. So all of that structure is something that we helped with the regulators when it was time to write this framework for crypto. And fundamentally, all it meant was utilizing traditional, what in Canada is called 81-102 regulation. So it's not like if any of that was created by 3IQ, but
Mhm.
understanding and getting the regulators comfortable on which counterparties in the space are of institutional grade, doing the due diligence, introducing them to the regulators, and then framing all that into something that already existed to give the end investor all of that security and the benefits. So all that work is what we did way back in before 2020 and then launching in 2020. And today, all our other products, including our competitors, including the US competition, all benefit from that work. And so, yes, they get Coinbase, they get Tetra Trust, they get a separate entity. So all that is what we call bankruptcy remote. So regardless of what happens to 3IQ, regardless of what happens to any of the competition, your funds are protected in that structure from a regulatory perspective. What you mentioned in terms of CDIC, that's outside of a fund manager's responsibility, but that does come
Mhm.
with having a regulated account in Canada.
Right.
So
Yeah.
whether it's with Wealthsimple or TD Direct or whatever, or
Mhm.
E-Trade, whatever brokerage account you may use, those accounts are CDIC protected as well. And so there are multiple layers of defense for the end investor here with these kind of products.
Gotcha. That's great. I think people will really benefit from that information and
Yeah.
just
Sorry, I went
having that
super
option, right?
technical there, but we're very
No,
passionate
that's
about
fine.
understanding how these work, and people should understand. Like they're simple to understand, but they're also complexities in terms of the
Right.
layers. And all that means is that you're protected from multiple fronts with some of the largest players in the space, as well as the full power of the Canadian regulatory body.
100%. So I hear basically what you're saying is a lot of like there's three providers in Canada now for an XRP spot ETF specifically.
Yep.
They're all largely similar to that effect.
Yeah, fundamentally speaking, with a product that's not actively managed, in other words, if there's no active trading, if there's no staking involved, things of that nature. So
Right.
on the staked products or actively managed products, so let's say you were writing covered calls, or let's say you were managing a basket or a portfolio, then you will see differences in terms of performance and things of that
Okay.
nature. So, for example, our products that have staking tend to outperform for multiple reasons, which we don't have to get into here. We could talk about that over a staking presentation.
Absolutely.
But for XRP specifically, when it comes to how it functions, it's a spot asset. There's no lending, there's no trading, there's no staking, of course, and with Ripple and XRP, there is no staking on the chain itself. And so you're really just trying to build a product that is trying to do a few things. Number one, drive fees as low as possible for investors. So how do you negotiate with a custodian? How do you negotiate with your liquidity provision? So at the end of the day, when we settle the ETF cash to crypto or crypto to cash, how do you minimize those fees? All in the best interest of the investors. So fundamentally speaking, that's our duty as an investment manager, whether it's 3IQ or the competition. And so, roughly speaking, I'll say if you buy any product, you will be you will be taken care of in a proper way, right? So there's no product I would say that's no, that one's dangerous. This one isn't. They're all great products. Fundamentally, by choosing a product that doesn't have active management in this case, it's more coming down to the brand and the ethos. And what we like to educate people is this is all we do, right? We help write the
Yep.
playbook. We educate regulators around the world. We educate people everywhere. We bring institutions into the space. All we do is eat, drink, and sleep crypto. And so we like it. We always appreciate it. We like it. We value and are grateful for any support that the community gives to 3IQ when it's time to choose that product.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I've spoken to multiple members of your team, and you guys know your stuff. So
Yes.
definitely impressed with your overall, ability to perform. And the team has been, like I said, second to none. So really appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with me today. And you brought up the topic of fees. So that's something that you are waiving for the first 6 months, correct?
Yeah, so we waived the management fees for the first 6 months, and then after that, for the time being, after the 6 months, we are the fees are at 59 bips, so it is the lowest of the three
It's the lowest.
products. It's the lowest of the three products after the wave. So one of the competition isn't waiving, the other one is. So after all the waves are done, we're still the longer term cheapest for now. If people decide to change pricing, we'll see. But for the time being, we are the cheapest. The other thing too is more around size, and so
Mhm.
we came out of the gate with a pretty good size, and we're still growing. And so what you'll see is the overall impact on total cost to the fund. And so the smaller you are, they have just fixed costs like custody and things of that nature that are a fixed cost to operate, and so that
Mhm.
gets passed along across every unit holder. So the larger the fund, the more the unit holders, the cheaper the cost per unit holder, if that makes any sense, right? So
Yes.
the bigger the fund, the cheaper it is to operate, and that those returns are also passed through to the investor.
Right. Okay.
And so we're,
And
we're the cheapest, we're the largest right now.
gotcha. And could you give some updated figures just with regards to the inflows and the assets under
Yeah.
management as of today's date?
Yeah, happy to give the update. I just got the data from the team. So as of today, I'll talk about our ETF. I'll talk about the right now the space
Okay.
in Canada in general. So we're
Perfect.
just above 50 million in AUM as of this morning. So the detailed numbers change all the time. So I'm not going to say it's 50 point whatever. So about between 50 and 55 million as of today, because we're seeing some trading volume. So we're seeing some positive trading today. And then overall, as an industry between the three players, we're just shy of 100. And so within Canada right now, rounded between 90 and 95 million in the first week or so of trading is our first few weeks of trading is what the fund is at right now for within Canada in general, and 3IQ specifically is over 50% of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and it did hit XRPQ is the ticker on the TSX. It did hit a new all-time high yesterday. 1466 was the all-time high there. So,
Yeah, we're seeing. I mean, we're the charts are for right now. We saw the bounce back in the S&P, right?
mhm. Yep.
Bitcoin Bitcoin's been holding quite strong at near its all-time highs, and then we're seeing the other sort of like call it blue chip assets. Ethereum, well, Ethereum's been struggling this year, but Solana and XRP are off their highs, but they've been holding in a nice pattern. And if I know, not financial advice, but the charts in general are looking very positive for the space right now. And so if we talk about when's the alt season or what's going to happen during alt season, I think the biggest change this year is we've seen a big the institutionalization of the space much more. We're talking to some large numbers, and at the
Right.
same time, we're seeing the winners keep on winning. Right, so it's not like if XRP is being displaced or Solana is being displaced by the next thing. There are emerging technologies, but right now, the winners from the last cycle who have emerged, the winners this cycle, are clearly the ones attracting the institutional capital and the retail capital, which meant again, performance leads to more performance, and so that's what we're kind of seeing in the market right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much room for them all to grow and win, and it's an exciting time for sure. And you mentioned, your other products. How would you say XRP, the ETF, is compared to, like, how is it performing compared to, say, that of Bitcoin and or Ethereum in the early days?
So I would say it's interesting. We launched. I Fundamentally speaking, the Bitcoin was the one that raised a ton of assets when it first launched. Now you got to think it was the first regulated product. It was in the middle of COVID. It was back when Bitcoin was going from like 5K to 20 to 20K and then surpassing its new all-time high. So it was a different environment. Now what we will say is when we've launched these new products during these tariff uncertainties, during a time when interest rates are much higher than they were in the times of COVID. Normally, you'd think that these, what people would consider riskier assets would not be performing overly well in terms of raising assets. But there's so much demand for XRP from the community and from individuals that we've been quite pleasantly surprised by the performance out of the gate. So now let's not talk about price appreciation performance. I'm talking just
Yeah,
demand, people willing to learn
inflows.
more, and inflows have been quite positive for us, so far. And like to give you an example, there's been a Solana ETF launched in the U.S. Last week. I think that one's at under 30 million. We got to 100 million in our Solana within the first week. And XRP the same. We're at 50 within the first few weeks, and there's consistent demand every day. And a lot of our inbound requests for education and for more information is coming around XRP. So lots of demand,
Yep,
and that usually means more buying and more people accumulating longer terms. Right now, there's sort of the tell me more about it, want to learn more about XRP. So that's great news. We're
for sure.
spending a lot of time educating new or net new potential owners, not just people who own XRP who will now want to buy the ETF.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had me going in so many directions there. It was perfect segue, multiple segues into
Oh,
my next
sorry.
question, but
Yeah.
but we'll tackle each one as we go through here because it's an exciting time. And for myself, when I added to the ETF, it was for 100% long-term purposes, right? I'm adding it to my TFSA, my tax-free savings account. So, I'm essentially not going to touch it for maybe even decades, right? Because of that fact that when I take it out, it's all tax-free.
Yep.
So I would assume that most people are probably doing the same, right? Especially now that it's offered in a registered
100%.
plan.
The
Yeah,
registered accounts are a big popular feature of the ETFs. I mean, even a lot of we got. Unfortunately, this is something that we hope to get through, but right now we were not able to get that through the regulators. It is
right.
changing. So the desire for people who already own XRP to bring it into the ETF. Now, someone may say, why would you want to take your spot assets and wrap it in an ETF and pay a management fee or a custody fee, right? Well, it comes with the benefits of if you trust the counterparty, saying, you know what, I'm starting to get a lot of XRP and I'm getting a little uncomfortable self-managing this. I may want to, hand it off to a professional manager, and putting it in an ETF is an easier route. The second is you would get those tax registered accounts benefits. So that is a feature that we're all working towards. I cannot give a date. I can't even give if it's going to happen, but it's a feature that 3IQ will continue pushing for to empower investors, even those who already own it.
Okay, cool. And you touched on Solana a bit. We're seeing, a lot of optimism in the US about approvals. You're seeing Bloomberg analysts saying, Solana, XRP, it's a virtual certainty, higher than 95% chance. You got Polymarket, which I've never seen it be in the 98% probability range and it be wrong, saying that XRP ETF in the US, 98% probability it gets approved this year. What can you tell us about that? Like usually, Canada is a precursor. It often precedes US approvals. We've been seeing that with, Bitcoin, Ethereum ETFs, even the MJ. That's another topic on this channel. We're seeing the same thing there. What can you tell us about that? Like, what are your thoughts on a timeline for an XRP spot ETF in the US?
So I think for sure that 98% trending to 100 is accurate as a number. It's going to happen. The biggest difference as to why. So again, 3AQ, the work we did originally to get Bitcoin and Ethereum out of the gate led to Canada always being a bit ahead of the game, right?
Right.
Now, when it comes to what we got for the industry this year, which we're super proud of, which a clear framework. So before this year, it was always one-off. Hey, we want to launch a new product, and it was always treated as a one-off exemption with the regulators. So it's hard to build a roadmap with when you don't have the clear ability of saying what can or cannot be approved. Now, what we did get after, again, I'll give credit to the regulators. We spent a lot of time in commentary mode, educating. They were going out to industry, asking questions, and we finally landed on a framework. And that framework was for them, anyways. If there was a regulated futures market in a regulated exchange, so not a perpetual futures market on an offshore exchange, but a regulated futures market on the CME or on a regulated exchange in Canada, which right now there are none. So call it the CME. They would allow that product to be released. And so
Gotcha.
when they announced that, it gave us a clear framework. And so then when we started, talking with the CME and others to get us, and talking with, for example, some different partners that we have, like CF Benchmarks, who are the index provider, et cetera, who also are the index provider for the futures, we had a sense of which ones were gonna happen or not. And there was sort of a feeling in the air. And then, of course, that led to a leak on Twitter for Solana and XRP futures to be approved. So we knew when we saw that those were to be the next two approved in Canada. Funny enough, those were also the two biggest requested products in
Yep.
our CRM by far, and XRP even more than Solana from a CRM perspective. And so for us, that's how we got it through. So now once the US launched the regulated futures and it gave us access to launch our ETF, and we saw that the trend with the elections and the trend in the sort of new crypto czar and David Sachs, and the trend with the new SEC regulator, all roads were pointing to that. Now, for what's missing there is more around specific things around tax treatment, around staked assets, and things of that nature. So they're all just kind of putting the final bow on that framework in the US, and then there will be a wave of ETFs launched, including XRP. Right now, we're lucky. We got Canada first, so we get to service our clients and people globally before the US, gives us a little bit of a head start. But fundamentally speaking, that will come in the US, and that should bring another wave of capital and institutional credibility to XRP.
And is that something that you're going to be looking to capitalize on? Are you going to be looking to service the US market as well?
Yeah, so basically our current product is accessible in the US if you have access to the TSX in your brokerage account. Now, we cannot advertise to retail in Canada. We can promote our products to institutional and accredited investors, which we do. We have other private products that are not ETFs as well. And so we are talking to institutions that may want to allocate to things beyond Bitcoin. In terms of retail, people can access our products. We do have a US dollar ticker, so it's still listed on the TSX, but XRPQ.U is if you want to invest in US dollars, you can. And so we see good activity there as well. So I would say right now that probably about 30 to 40% of the activity in the ETF is coming from the US. And so it's both Canadian and US interest, which is really cool. And we're starting to build out that education with institutions in various types of products where our ETF will be used that will give them access. And so you'll start seeing bigger dollars come in beyond retail as well, with with some institutions that again want to gain exposure. So the ETFs overall are just a great vehicle, not just tax advantage for retail, but also give that institutional trust to bring in some bigger names into the space.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
in terms of like institutional versus retail, what has been kind of the demand for that? Like, has it surprised you in any way? Are you seeing more institutional versus retail demand? Maybe if you could touch on that for a quick moment.
Yeah. So institutions always a little. So it's always there's always a lagging effect, right? So basically, right now the product's out. So right now it's primarily retail. But what I
Hmm.
will say is the discussions we're having with institutions around educating around this. They're looking for that diversified access to several. They're not saying I want to go all in one or the other. And so right now the blue chips, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, XRP are the ones that are the most attractive to institutions besides doing venture, liquid venture, besides going into the next potential project. Because the reality is, these are the only vehicles or the only, sorry, assets that have a sure amount of enough size for them to allocate. So you have to understand institutions, when they allocate, they're going to come in with the
Liquidity,
big
yeah.
numbers. They need liquidity,
Hmm.
they need size, they
Hmm.
need all of that, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking at all these things. I could say we are talking to them. And so we should start seeing that institutional to retail split become more closer to 50-50 as the year progresses.
Gotcha. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And in terms of TFSAs and RRSPs, registered account, what has been the uptake in these accounts? What sort of activity are you seeing there?
So that we don't have transparency or see through
Oh,
into.
okay.
So we know fundamentally where it's coming from. Like there is data available to say it's coming from a brokerage account, like from Wealthsimple, or it's coming from
Mhm.
RBC, or it's coming from TD, or it's coming from the US. That we have visibility. But from an ETF perspective, we don't know who the individual investors are, and we don't know what accounts that they're buying it from. That's it's part of the benefits to the end investor. So we don't have access to who are in our products, unless, of course, we were to bring in an institution that says, yes, Pascal, we're going to buy, thank you, we're going to buy your product, and then we see that big ticket. You tend to know who it is, but for the retail investor, we don't have names and we don't know what accounts they're investing from. But typically speaking, these are very popular products for RRSPs and TFSAs for sure.
Okay, fair enough. And what sort of like criteria would you look at in selecting a new asset for an ETF? Like, are you looking at market cap? Are you looking at like the top five? What sort of criteria do you have on your checklist?
Yeah, so for us, number one, there was the framework with the regulators, and then there was the 3IQ sort of framework on top of that, right? So number one is, what will the regulators allow? And so
Mhm.
now that we know it, for the time being, the rule is if there's a regulated futures market, they will allow it. Now, so far, only the four assets that are out, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, XRP, have regulated futures. That may change. The second is then our personal ethos of what we want to give investors access to. And that usually comes on market cap, liquidity, and also use case on the technology front. So we're big believers in where the space is going, and we want to make sure that we're giving individuals access to things that we're seeing proper activity on chain, or that we're seeing big deals happening. So we're seeing, of course, Ripple, building out a lot of amazing things, getting some global deals done. So we're seeing actual use case and growth, right? Because that's what's going to drive adoption, price, and legitimacy versus just speculation. And
Yeah.
so that's our sort of framework is general use case, big deals, on-chain activity, etc. And then finally, it's the viability of the product. We don't want the MER to just blow off investor performance, right? So if you have an
Okay.
ETF that's stuck at 5 million or 10 million because there's not enough demand,
Mm,
your cost of operating that will just eat into the returns. And that's just not, it's not good for the manager. Like we're
yeah.
losing money
Good
and the
point.
investor is losing performance. So we would never want to launch something that's going to harm the investor that way. And so those are the things we look at. That doesn't mean that basket products in the future or index products will not be a potential solution for broad-based access. I think single asset ETFs will be difficult to scale,
Mhm.
but broad-based, diversified portfolios to give investors access to the broader landscape is a way to solve for all that. It meets It checks off the boxes for the regulators in the future. It checks off demand because now you have demand from the wealth channels as well, where they're not feeling like they have to pick one winner. Like, am I picking this one over that one? Right? They're buying a
Yep.
basket, and it also makes the viability of the product and therefore the cost to operate much lower, which benefits the investor. So that's probably what you're going to see in the future.
That's interesting. Yeah, those are great points. And I know you don't have a crystal ball or anything. And like you said, it really depends if they have a regulated futures market. But
Yes.
any other like guesses, I guess, could you say for the next runner-up for an ETF in Canada? Would you be looking at like Litecoin or Dogecoin?
So I will say, based on the conditions I shared from the regulatory side,
Hmm.
you're probably going to see an index approved before another single asset.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And switching gears a little bit back over to Ripple and
Yep.
XRP and the whole ethos of the two, how would you differentiate the two? I know there's a lot of people that conflate the two. In your perspective and in your opinion, how would you basically separate the two in terms of their roles and their future prospects?
You mean between Ripple and XRP?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, a little bit about my background. I come from the early days of the web and open source. So my career
Okay.
started in Web one. We call it Web one now, but basically the beginnings of the internet. When again the benefits to the end users were clear, but took time to materialize. And then I also got very active into open source and the Web two revolution as well. And so I share this because people need to understand how these technologies have been built. They're open source, and then there's a foundation that manages, yes, the growth. Their mission is to grow the technology, grow adoption, et cetera. And so those are two separate entities. One is the asset and the technology and the network, and the other one is basically the company, in this case of Ripple Labs, or a foundation in the case of like Solana Foundation or the Ethereum Foundation, where they're there to try to help govern and grow the space and the technology. And so I think fundamentally what we're seeing with these blue chip assets, like I said, the winners keep on winning. The getting the deals, getting adoption from institutions, not just from the buying the asset, but also actually building on top of it, right? And so you're seeing Ethereum, Solana, and XRP getting a lot and the most traction in terms of people building on top of it. And so for us, that just means that the foundations, and companies like Ripple have done a great job at educating the space and bringing awareness on why they should build on this chain. And so we're just seeing continued innovation. And so for us, yes, you could create models in terms of then there's the tokenomics itself, right? So every transaction you have some XRP, that gets burnt and those
And,
kind of
yeah.
things. Yeah. So when you look at the role of Ripple in terms of building the ecosystem for more use cases, so building an AMM, building a lending market, et cetera. So you're building more use cases, you're
Yep.
promoting the technology, you're getting institutional deals. So as all these things come together and come to life, and you have more people building and more people using all these tools, that just leads to more XRP being transacted and being used. And
Hmm.
again, not giving you a price prediction, but if we understand the mechanics of that, so that basically the issuance diminishes because XRP gets burnt. So in our opinion, yes, there's always some speculative growth. That's why you get the volatility. But the
Right.
long-term trend, follow the building and follow the adoption. And so far, that's looking very promising.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's deflationary in nature, and there's so many use cases. And Ripple was created after XRP, but essentially they're the biggest cheerleader for
Yes.
the ecosystem, right? So it's yeah, I see a lot of people conflating it, and there's a lot of controversy and, for lack of a better word, just hate towards Ripple. But at the end of the day, we need that for the space. In my opinion, we need to lift each other up and kind
Well,
of
well, you need
have
a
those
voice.
stewards, right?
You need a voice. Like for example, even in my early open source days, and this is outside of crypto, but there, my company utilized open source a lot. We gave money. We also participated on boards of some of these projects. These were all voluntary boards, but without money, and without our
Hmm.
commitment to those projects, and without us giving resources to those projects. I'm not saying we were the
Sure.
only ones, but if the community doesn't come together to do that, if there's not a voice, then the adoption will, even if you have the best technology in the world, if there is no voice and no advocate for that technology, how is the world supposed to know or adopt it, right? So,
Exactly.
and even as an engineer myself, I may get hate for this, but the best technology isn't always the clear winner. You also need
Mm.
the voice in
The
the market,
connections.
the
Yeah.
connection. Yeah,
Yeah, it's all about the connections. If you're getting behind those closed door meetings and
exactly. And
meeting with the BIS and the IMF and all of these super organizations, right?
yes. And so these foundations have proven their ability to do that and support the adoption of the underlying technology.
Yeah, and it's an exciting time for Ripple as a company as well, right? XRP is the digital asset, and Ripple's a company, a
Yep.
centralized company, with a board of directors, a CEO, right? Governance. They're they just applied for a national banking license and also a a Fed master account, right? And then you have Fed now looking to pivot to ISO 2022. So you could say the stars are aligning in a perfect way at the moment right now for the ecosystem.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, I mean, I think that's the beauty about these communities that you and others have built is staying in touch with all that's happening and then sharing that information back to your community, because that ideally helps remove from just pure speculation, saying,
Right.
you have other channels who may say, I think price is going here for no other reason than just being speculative, but you guys are doing a great job at educating, sharing that movement, and we're believers of that as well. If you understand the tokenomics, and you understand the adoption, and you understand how the foundations and the companies like Ripple, what they're doing, like I said, repeating myself, but when you link all that together, you could build your own mental model and make your own wise investment choice and where you choose to invest your dollars.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I guess we'll wrap that up. That's a great time to wrap it up. Is there anything else you would like to leave the audience with today, Pascal?
No, the only thing I want to say is, again, we love to do these. If ever there's other questions or you want us to come back and talk about other things, of course, we're a regulated entity, so can't talk about future price or things of that nature. But in terms of education, in terms of just talking about what we're seeing in the space, and anything else, we are here to serve the community. So anytime you want us back on to educate or to talk about anything, we're here to help. And at the same time, as people look into our products, if they reach out, you will get access to a human being. We have a support team that will reply to your emails or get on the phone. We're here to help support people's integration and adoption into crypto.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time today. We'll definitely be having you back on in the future, and
Awesome.
hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye bye.